Erik Halkjear, who is the chairman of Reporters Without Borders, is going to speak.
So I'm Erik Halkjear. I'm the president of Reporters Without Borders in Sweden, and I won't say that much. I think it's more like since I'm one of the organizers, I need to say something. And I would just like to thank first Stefania for your very good and how do you very, what I think, I forgot the word in English now, matnyttig presentation. And I also like to thank the support committee for Julian Assange, of course, to organizing this with us. And I will repeat what Sigyn said, please do swish some money for this. Yes. But it's so very, very important that we don't forget about Julian Assange. I'm not going to go into details. Stefania has already very well explained the situation. But I do need to repeat that he is in prison. He's liberated of his freedom just because he publicly informed us about atrocities committed by US military and NATO military. And this is information that we have the right to know. And we need to know this because we are the ones who are voting for our governments. It's a democratic right, the right to information. And just the fact that he is facing maybe 175 years in prison for this is outrageous. And we should never forget about this. And we should keep on mentioning his name and coming to these seminars. Because it's so important, and also for him, I think, to know that there are people actually fighting for his freedom. And Reporters Without Borders have taken this fight for a very long time, especially our office in the UK, in London, of course. And I think it's, for us, when you do these kinds of remembrance or seminars about people who's been jailed. We can also mention David Isak, Gwamin High, Swedish publicist, journalists who've been in prison for many, many years. It's so important to be able to come with new information or to have the pleasure or the joy of inviting people like Stefania who can put some new light and focus on these cases. Because otherwise we tend to sort of lose this engagement or the force that we maybe should have all the time. So we need new information like you have provided us. So thanks again. I would just like to give the word soon to Percy Bratt, because I'm very curious what you have to say about all the information that we got now. Percy has also helped us a lot on the case of David Isak. He's been jailed in Eritrea for 21 years. And there are some similarities actually, because we have three times you have asked the prosecutor general in Sweden to open a case on crimes against humanity against Isaias Afwerki, the dictator in Eritrea. And they have refused this all 3 times. And when you put this together, what Stefania just told us, it's hard not to see some sort of a big challenge in the prosecutor's office. There's something not correct there. You should be, as a prosecutor in Sweden, maybe enforcing these cases to not even being asked about it. You should go before and open cases, or give us this information all transparent, so we don't need to ask ourselves what really happened. So with these words, I say thank you, Percy, also for your work, tireless work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that one very important and interesting principal aspect in Stefania's fascinating presentation in this very important and horrible case is the access to official documents, the rights to public access to official documents. That is, as you know, safeguarded in one of our fundamental laws, in the Freedom of the Press Act. And this right is concerned as a cornerstone in open democratic society. It is a vital precondition for the citizens' insight in public affairs and for the media to work as a public watchdog. And we have lately seen that the authorities underline this right. And I mean that one striking example is this Julian Assange case. And as Stefania described, we have fought in the Administrative Court of Appeal to get access to these documents, and we know that there are more than between 7,000 and 9,700 documents. And before the Administrative Court of Appeal, the prosecutor said that the very limited material that Stefania had access to, that was the only material that was kept. But in addition to that, the prosecutor referred to the general regulations by the National Archive concerning when public documents can be excised, can be sorted out. Riksarkivets generella föreskrifter. And the regulation is, in my interpretation, like this. The authorities should excise public documents that are of temporary or less importance to the activity of the authority. The excising is only permitted if the public's right to insight is not violated and if documents lack importance to the administration of justice, public administration and research. And as this is Swedish public, I would say it in Swedish also, myndigheten skall gallra ut allmänna handlingar av tillfälle eller ringa betydelse för myndighetens verksamhet. Gallring får endast ske under förutsättning att allmänhetens rätt till insyn inte åsidosätts och att handlingar bedöms sakna värde för rättskipning, förvaltning och forskning. In the Court of Appeal, Administrative Court of Appeal, we tried to get a clarification from the prosecuting office of which material has been excised and on what grounds, but without result. And we are, as Stefania rightly pointed out, talking about one of the most internationally recognized and most controversial and criticized Swedish criminal investigation in modern time. To excise many thousand pages without correspondence with foreign authorities in this case is a clear conflict with general regulation and totally undermining the right to access of official documents. And I think this is a general trend. We can see it also in Corona. The Corona Commission criticized the government not taking notes during their meetings. And all the time we are undermining this absolutely fundamental right to insight for the public. So that is one of the very important aspects of this. And I think that the media should write about this. How can the prosecuting office delete, excise, sort out thousands and thousands of pages of conversation without anybody reacting? I think it's very important that we bring up this to the public debate. Thank you.
I want you to introduce Håkan, who is our poet. And for almost all our meetings, he has written poetry in English or in Swedish. And he is going to perform a new poem for tonight now. And then there will be a panel with all the speakers and so on.
Thank you. Right. So it's time for an art break so we can get a more deeper sense of what this is all about. It's not only about the person in jail, it's about our freedom. So, it would be so nice to have music with this. I mean, I see a piano, it would be so great to have a piano player. Okay, wow. Are you a piano player?
I used to be.
Okay. Right. So. Okay. Just play something. See what happens. Something classic, something baroque, maybe. I don't know. No. Wait, I have to have a glass of water. Okay, this poem is called The Fear. Can you hear me? Conscience, are you here? I keep myself in secrecy. My world is built on fear. The fear of what to think and tell, of living in a prison cell, in cognitively dissonance, behind the bars of broken pens. The fear to find a fake democracy, a rules-based order industry of hate and scorn and othering, a government big brothering. The truth is not the truth in its own credit. It all depends on who it was who said it. The fear of life in coma, all locked up, with brave new soma in the cup that gives me my reality of Guardian, Times, and Swedish state TV. Opinions are treason, facts are foreign lies. It's profit over reason. Must not believe my eyes. The fear of thinking wrong, of singing someone else's song. The shame of being played in corporate secret power game. The fate of all unite in 2 minutes of hate. Of Putin, Trump, and the Chinese, and the tin-foil hat COVID conspiracies. The fear has clutched our hearts within, because no one wants to end up like him. Pretend we're free and all is fine. Who cares about the Nord Stream pipeline? Okay, part 2. It's over. I cannot stay afraid, crying in my coward brain. Come on, he sits in fucking jail. Julian Assange has been for more than 1 decade. The silence from the mainstream media is bombshell news of world schizophrenia. They tried to kill the man who sacrificed his life. They take away his dignity, his children, his wife. He changed the game with proofs to read how power runs and feeds on greed. He gave his life for truth and peace. If we don't fight, his fight will never cease. Capitulate to secret power, terror laws in this final hour. Canaries are tweeting, screaming. Stop this digitally dreaming, death dystopia, fake reality of EU, NATO, freedom spree. be strong, my conscience says to me. Free press, free speech, set Julian free. And see the real enemy. Tack. Rolf Kristiansson on piano. Okay, shall we start? Erik, do you have something you want to ask Stefania?
Yes. As you said, a journalist should look out the window. You should also ask stupid questions. Why was it so important for the UK Crown prosecutor to keep Marianne away from? Why was it so important? What was the purpose was?
So I like to seek facts, and I have no certainties about why they basically provided that legal advice. I have not a document provided, the rationale behind this decision. And I have been fighting for the last 8 years to obtain any documentation on the decision-making process, to understand why they took that decision, which made no sense, from all points of view. It made no sense because it was not in the interest of justice. It made no sense in terms of of how it was perceived by the general public. It made no sense economically because they spent millions in years where there are no money, there are no resources. So why such an absurd handling of this case? And the only explanation I have is that they had an interest to keep Julian Assange under continuous investigation for alleged rape, for allegations of rape. And in this way, they had him under arrest, under European arrest warrant, with this label of rapist, which of course destroyed his reputation, his credibility, public credibility, and destroyed any empathy from the public opinion, because of course when you are considered as a rapist, no one believes to you, no one cares about you, how you end up. And it is a matter of fact that he had no empathy, public empathy, for a decade, basically. And still in these days, there is this doubts, this idea that there is a kind of sinister guy who evaded the Swedish justice, when in fact he had been available to be questioned from the very beginning, So I believe the UK authorities had a lot of interest in keeping him in London under arrest, so that they could look at their work, they could look at their sources, they could look at their methods. And in fact, there was a heavy surveillance of the Ecuadorian embassy, both outside and inside. We now know that there was a spying operation inside the Ecuadorian embassy, allegedly on CIA behalf. So they had a lot of interest in having him in London under arrest and with this label of rapist, so that there was no empathy, especially from that part of the public which is most sensible to women's rights, which is the very same part of the public which is sensible to the human rights violations, war crimes. So it was I believe it was a sophisticated calculation. And of course, what we should ask ourselves, what was the role of the US authorities? And you have to realize that in the last 8 years, not a single page of correspondence between the US and the UK or the US and Sweden was ever released to me. Sweden claims they never had a correspondence with the US, but actually we have seen they receive at least an email from the FBI, so some correspondence there was definitely between them, and they destroyed. Why they destroyed? I mean, if it was just a request to know basic information and they directed the US authorities to the prosecution website, why to destroy it? You know, it was such a trivial email, why to destroy it? Whereas the UK has basically refused to release any correspondence with the US. It means that this correspondence is potentially dynamite and contain evidence of requests of involvement of the US from the very beginning, which I think that was the case. At the same time, we know that the Obama administration did not press for the charges. It was the Trump administration. And this, I think, is really relevant.
Could I please ask you, Percy, do you have any comment on this? Do you have an idea or guess of?
I would say that I very much agree with Stefania's analysis. I would say that I very much agree with to keep this alive and and you can see that is also a question that is interesting to put to you, members of the media. What Arne described, what is the explanation that this very important principle case has been so little attention about it in Swedish media? I think that is a very interesting question. I don't have any answer. Perhaps you have.
This is the core question of the whole thing, because Sweden is in many ways the criminal in this. The fact that the rape allegations defined the issue, the fact that they were spread, so to speak, as a means of tarnishing Julian Assange. So the question of whether he was a bad guy as a person became the core question rather than a minor question. It doesn't matter whether someone is a saint. One has to listen, or a devil. One has to listen to the message and take the message for what it is. And that is really, if you're a journalist, you don't make this kind of moral judgment in advance. You check the facts, and if the facts are relevant, then you publish them, regardless of who that person is. But I think in a way, and that is really a great interest to me in relation to Stefania's book. When I read the book, in a way, this is, of course, my own very personal judgment. It was like reading a novel by Stig Larsson. because it dealt with the reality of one level, and it was, of course, pointed in terms of facts, but it was also a picture of how the world doesn't function right now. You cannot trust things which you thought you could trust. Yeah. And I think in order to your point about being a progressive, that of course you have to, especially in Sweden. I think that is perhaps one element of progressive success in Sweden. Things you could say about a woman when I was 20 years old. I mean, the idea that someone would say something like that today is simply crazy. I mean, you don't do that in Sweden anymore. There is progress in this. but in a way, we sense that Sweden had solved the basic problems of democracy, that we had a stability which we could trust. And in reality, it's not true. And the Assange case, in my opinion, it proved to my mind that one had to start again. But I would like to ask, in the sense that, why does one choose to act in a matter like this? You made a choice at one point. You couldn't be certain that you would succeed. You put your reputation at risk. And let's say Nils Meltzer, who in my opinion is a major hero in all of this, he put his position at risk, and he has been damaged by it.
Yeah, that's... Am I on? Yeah, that's... my feeling is... okay, now. The reason why they're doing this to Assange is to scare people. I mean, that's the only reason, to make journalists afraid. The reason why Julian Assange is in jail and why he's been tortured and been put away is to scare people. I mean, we don't have freedom of press in Sweden now, I think. I mean, and in a way, I think the whole... the man Assange and the Belmarsh prison and all, it's getting very personal, and of course we have to... But the big issue here is journalists are afraid to say the truth about a lot of things that goes against our interests. And now we have changed the constitutional law in Sweden. So now we're getting more close to NATO. And this is, what do you think? What is your opinion when I say that about the fear?
It's for me.
Yeah, and maybe Johannes, I would like you to join. Yeah, give it to Johannes.
Well, I would, of course, agree entirely that it is a question of fear, but it is also a question of servility, and it is also a question of it is also a question of servility, of an idea that journalists are part of power, and they want to be part of power. They want to be part of an elite, and this is something that you notice when you interact inside of the journalistic community. I would actually say that for me, well, apart from the fact that Julian is a friend of mine and that's how I see him, he is also to a very, very large extent a symbol of what has happened to our society, and I specifically mean Sweden, but also in a broader sense, in the last 10 years. Reading Stefania's book, I can see this path of going through these small details that you dot down, sort of almost like this mathematician, as you say that you are, and through these small steps, you can actually follow how the temperature is being sort of turned up in the boiling water, and how we currently are already boiled. So I'm sorry to say it this way, but as a journalist, it is absolutely clear that today, in the year 2023, in Sweden, we are not at all in the same place as we were in the year 2010 when this saga started. Today, we have a centralized, unofficial censorship. We have just looking through the material that WikiLeaks has leaked, starting from 2010 and then finishing up in 2016-17, and we're speaking about Swedish media. We have a situation that gradually transformed from publishing a lot to basically publishing nothing. In 2016 and 2017, Julian released to the Swedish media some of the most important corruption affairs relating to some of the most important Swedish politicians that were never published, and they are still not published. And I mean, my colleagues at Swedish television and me worked with these materials for many weeks, and they were stopped. The same thing with Aftonbladet and many other publications. So the important thing to relate to, and the important thing to not forget, is that when we speak about Julian and think about it as just a man, Julian in Sweden is not the same as Politkovskaya or the same as David Isaac. Julian in Sweden is actually our freedom of speech. And this is something that I can say out of personal experience. My dear professor sitting here in front of me, he saw me starting my journalist career some 20 years ago, and has seen how my work has been forced to stop. So it's impossible to work seriously in investigative journalism today in Sweden, unless you report on puppies or something interesting of that sort. So I think this is something that we shouldn't forget. It's not only a question of fear, it is a question of servility, but also it's a very, very practical matter. We have a censorship regime.
I would just like to comment. I'm the president of Reporters Without Borders. No, sorry. I'm arranging. I would just like to just comment on this. When you do these sorts of accusations, it would be very good to know why. What are you afraid of? Why can't you publish? What is the threat against you? Because I haven't been informed about it.
Well,
so
I can't speak about my fear. I can speak about what has happened in my workplace when particular stories have been stopped. I can give you a very specific example. This was in the end of 2016. We got access to material that showed how the postcode lottery was involved in an enormous corruption affair, siphoning off hundreds of millions of crowns to Hillary Clinton, among others, and how the Minister of Foreign Affairs was involved in this particular story. So me and the head of the news department of Swedish television, we sat in a glass booth in Swedish television, and we worked on this story for a number of weeks, and he was very happy about it. He found some of the most interesting details, and in the end of the day, he came down on the day prior to our planned publishing and said that we had been given some kind of directive from above, I don't know where, that said that this was going to be spiked. Me, as a regular reporter, I have never had an opportunity to fight against this system. But this is exactly the kind of things that I used to hear about when I was working in the Middle East or when I was working in Central Asia. And people would tell me, well, you know, of course, this is the way it is. We can't report about the king. Well, you know. But actually, this has occurred in a very, very short period of time in the country that we live in today. 2010 and 2023 are entirely different countries.
I think one should make a judgment comparing countries in relation to the Assange case. And one can only speculate about why there are differences. If you take Germany, for instance, Günter Wallraff started a support project which proved very successful, where the leader of the Green Party backed it completely. They published a full-page advertisement in support of Julian Assange in the very conservative Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. They actually got 50% reduction in normal advertising price. And in a way, I mean, as I told you, as I said here in my speech, that I visited Wallraff 3 months ago, and we had a long discussion about this. In a way, Germany knows its history. It's know why the constitution, Verfassung in German, has a stature which it hardly has anywhere else in Europe. I don't say that it is a paradise in any way, because they have a horrible right wing as well in Germany. In Sweden, I have been for some years asking young people, what is the date of the present, which year was it taken? The present Swedish constitution. Nobody knows. Go to Norway and ask which year the Norwegian constitution was taken. You would be considered a villain if you even imply that they don't know it. Because the constitution is the foundation of being Norwegian in Norway. The same is true in Denmark. Now, a constitution is really a sort of sacrosanct document. And the point that Sweden now has changed the constitution in a fundamental manner, which means that in the future, when we point criticism at another country, if we do it the wrong way, or what is officially considered the wrong way, then we're breaking the rules of freedom of expression in Sweden. And no discussion about it. So the question I ask myself is this a result of my generation's idea of being Swedish? That we lived in a permanent paradise? That the so-called Swedish model was now not only the saving grace of Sweden, it was a saving grace for humanity. And then all of a sudden it collapses, and it's a tragedy. I think, though, and I'll be very short now, moral action can never be collective. Moral action is always personal. A collective as a group consists of persons that can share responsibility, that can share the result of action, but everyone involved has to realize that you are taking a risk. And I think perhaps in Sweden we would have to realize that we all have to take risks in the future. And the Assange case, to me, proves that we have passed the point where we can simply sit still.
We'll soon let you guys ask questions. All you here are journalists except you, Percy, and you haven't said anything yet. But don't you feel like betrayed? I mean, how is it? How do you look upon your fellow journalists who are not writing about this, who's not making any fuss about it? What does that make you feel? I give it to you.
That's why I keep doing this work. I cannot accept to abandon a colleague. You know, it's like your editors ask you to go out for an assignment and you're with a colleague and he falls off a cliff and you abandon him. You don't do it if you are a decent human being before then being a decent professional. You don't do it at a human level. You don't abandon it. And that's why I have insisted in getting the documentation, because no one was doing it. And without the facts, you cannot win a case. If you don't have the facts, you just have opinion. You just have educated guess. You cannot. You can never win a case. You cannot, and the power manipulate the facts as it please. So you don't have to leave the facts in the hands of the power, because they manipulate it, and you have no way to reply to their manipulation. So, for example, when in 2015 I realized that no one had tried to get the documentation, I thought to myself, it's unbelievable. Hundreds, thousands have written about this case without knowing the most important facts of this case. I have to do it. I have to do it. And I remember in 2011, after we published the most important revelation of WikiLeaks, the Afghan warlocks, Iraq warlocks, US diplomacy cables, the Guantanamo documents, there was an American colleague who approached me and told me, you got your scoops. Why do you risk your reputation for them? Drop them, because they will close you a lot of doors, which is true. I mean, it's true that working on this case, I mean, I can assure it didn't gain me any powerful friends in high places. Quite the opposite. It set me on a collision course with my former newspaper, La Repubblica. And at the end, I had to decide whether to stay there, whether to leave my newspaper or leave my work on the case. And I left my newspaper, absolutely. I left my newspaper where it was no longer possible to do this kind of work. And I decided to keep doing this work on the case because I find it absolutely important. And I have seen my income collapsing, seriously collapsing. And, but again, I would do it again. I would do it. And I have not even reported on my book what happened, the problem I'd experienced, because compared to the problems that Julian Assange has experienced, my problems are nothing. I was never arrested. I experienced intimidations. Yes, intimidations. I was followed very in a showy way, so that I realized that someone was following me for intimidation purposes. I was physically attacked in Rome and stolen very important documentation, which was not related to WikiLeaks, but 2 months after we published very important revelations on the NSA spying on world leaders, including 3 President French, Berlusconi, and so on. And this happened 2 months before. And I went to the police, and they said, I was mugged. I was convinced it was just mugged. And the police asked me, please tell us what happened. And I told them what had happened. And they said, this is not mugging. This is you went through an anomalous robbery. And after that, filing that criminal case at the police, I never heard again. Usually when we journalists file a criminal complaint, we hear from the police, from the prosecutors, never heard again. And I was spied inside the embassy. They recorded us, they filmed us, they accessed all my materials. But apart from these intimidations, I never experienced any problem, never death threats, never arrested, never put in prison. So all my troubles are nothing compared to what he has experienced. You know, his health has been devastated, absolutely devastated. And if you were there inside the embassy, you could realize how his health was collapsing. I remember the last time I met Julian Assange. I have been unable to visit him in the Belmarsh prison because they don't give permissions. They give authorizations to the family, to the lawyers, and to very few people. But the last time I met him was November 2018, and I went there for my newspaper, La Repubblica. And he was in such bad shape. He had lost so many kilos. He had this long hair and a beard. And I came, but he was very lucid and was convinced he would be arrested. I remember the embassy, which at the beginning was a very friendly place, had become kind of a prison. I remember I was inside a room waiting for Julian, and I accessed my phones, and immediately the guards came and seized the phone. So they were watching me in real time. And when Julian came, he was in such bad shape. I'd lost so many kilos. I had this long hair like an hermit. And I came out of the embassy. I wrote my newspaper. Julian Assange is dying. I'm not exaggerating. I found him in such a bad shape. And I wrote this email to my editors at La Repubblica, and I didn't hear from them. So usually when newspapers send you to a certain place, they ask you for a reportage, an article, an investigation. And for 2 days, I heard nothing from my editors. Then after 2 days, the deputy editor of La Repubblica contacted me. Stefania, we are trying to contact you for the last 2 days. We sent email, we call you, we sent text messages. Why you don't reply? And they said, because I have nothing on my phone. I have nothing on my emails. I have no text messages for you. So my communication had been completely isolated or obliterated, I don't know. And basically, a year after, we discovered these espionage activities inside the embassy, targeting phones, spying on us, getting our conversation. So this has been something you expect in an authoritarian state. You don't expect this happening in the heart of Europe with our large mouth on freedom of the press. I mean, in a sense, there is freedom of the press, otherwise we wouldn't be here discussing this case. Of course, there is some freedom of the press. Problem is when you touch this level, what I call the secret power. Problem is when you touch that level.
We have to let the... Very good. It's about time for you, the audience, to ask questions now. Maritz, are you ready with the microphone?
Just, there are journalists from Aftonbladet, Ordfront, Arbetaren, and some other papers. They were here before. Are they still here? Otherwise, because then we should let you in, ask the questions first, if you're still here. I know that Aftonbladet left.
Up there?
Yeah.
My name is Janne Flyger, and I'm professor at the Department of Criminology at Stockholm University, and I've been researching these kind of matters for many years. But just a comment, all this is, of course, very horrendous, what has happened to Julian Assange, of course. But I see it as some kind of informal, very beside of the law treatment. And in some way, I see it that the development today is even worse, because now we have codified this kind of actions into our laws. And especially with this new spy law, what's in action from the 1st of January, and the new proposed terrorist legislation that will criminalize anything that in any way can support terrorism, and that includes journalism. So we are in a very, very dangerous situation, according to my situation, but it's also formally okay. Because this has been, you describe it so very well, what has happened behind the curtains in some way, and they have been fooling around, and all this Percy mentioned about destroying documents, it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And what I mean is, with these new laws, we are the classical, we are free. We are free to do as we're told. And that's a main problem. And I hope the only way to fight against this, it's civil disobedience. Publish, 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 and do it a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just spend a word? It doesn't work?
Yes.
Can I spend just a word for Nils Melzer, because he is one of my heroes, absolutely. And you have to realize that I feel reassured that in certain human rights bodies, there are people like Nils Melzer, absolutely. I feel less in danger. And he paid the price, of course, and he's one of my heroes, absolutely.
Questions? Okay, up there.
Thank you very much, all. My question is, why human rights organization in Sweden don't do nothing. I write several times to Amnesty International Sweden. They done nothing. They do nothing. And I must say, perhaps be in contact more and more with human rights organization in Sweden. Discuss their role in this tragedy.
Should we take two more, by the way? Here and here.
Start with her.
So I was thinking about being brought up in Sweden and what we get to know about Sweden, and that we are a wonderful democracy and we've achieved everything, and the world should look at us as a good example. And in combination with Stefania's presentation, I wonder whose interest is it that they limit our access to knowledge about what the government is doing, both like military-wise and also like these documents. Why are we not able to access them? Whose interest is this? Because it's not in our interest. We want to know what our state is doing, but whose interest is it to limit our knowledge about this?
Thank you.
Those of us who have, I want to shift the question a bit from the journalistic side to the legal side. Those of us who have watched the Belmarsh tribunals, the last one in Washington, in that one, a lawyer woman represented a law firm who have actually made a legal case against Mike Pompeo. Is this possible in Sweden? I think Percy would be the best person to tell us, because destroying documents, official documents, is a crime. Is this punishable in any way? Are there any laws making it punishable in any way? Apart from everything else, like Marianne and everything else that the lawyers have not done, or the things that they have done, which is all against the law, their own law.
Thank you. Percy, would you take that last one? Thank you.
The provision I quoted for when we can exceed or sort out documents, it's only a föreskrift. It's rather low in the hierarchy, so to say, and it has never been tried, but I think it would be very important to try this. And I want to say what you said, madam, here, when it comes to destroying relevant official documents, a very strong movement around the world, and Sweden also, is right-wing populism. And right-wing populism talk about the deep state and the elite acting in the dark. And by accepting this, we give good arguments for them. What has really happened? I really understand what you mean. So it's very important for the media to give media cover of this. Why? How can authority destroy thousands of pages of relevant official documents? It's extremely important from a democracy point of view.
I think we've touched a very relevant aspect to all of this, which is the role of the United States. And it's, in my opinion, double-sided. On one level, what is happening legally is that Assange is threatened by sort of the re-emergence of a paragraph dating from the end of the First World War, which makes it possible for the United States to open a legal case against him for having disclosed American security material. Now, why should the United States have the right to make a legal case against someone living somewhere else, having Australian background? It certainly means that the presumption of the American attitude is that anyone, anywhere, should become a target for that particular implementation of American law, where the security interest defines legal matters regardless of where. And that, of course, means that journalism is threatened anywhere. I've been trying to tell my colleagues about this. We are not safe because we live in Sweden. And since we have a corrupt political system or a legal system which doesn't act, it means that we are already part of the problem. But the other side of this is the United States has an opposition. The United States has a tradition of acting in relation to legal matters, which is much stronger than in any European country. I don't want to paint the picture of the United States as a paradise, but certainly if you want to follow the Assange case, the United States is a crucial source of information. Yeah. And you have people like Noam Chomsky. I put him into the same category of my idols as I do Nils Meltzer, for instance. They are acting without any calculation of personal interest. They act according to moral principles, and they use their knowledge of legal matters to point at the scoundrels in all of this. And I think we in Sweden should create alliances. We should bring people here, just as we now have brought this Italian lady to us. And that is a new thing. We haven't had this, really. Thank you.
Thank you. And the question about why do organizations like Amnesty International, Swedish PEN, and maybe also Reporters Without Borders, you've been pretty quiet these last 10 years. Why is it so difficult for organizations like that to help this case and bring it out and spread it out, that is about Julian and about freedom of speech? And how is it in Italy? How are these organizations working there? I would like to hear Johannes and Stefania about this.
You talked about me, so I would like to answer, but it would be kind of rude not to. But I would like to say that I think it's a fairly easy answer to start with, that the Julian Assange case was in Sweden connected to, as we say, another case that has nothing to do with press freedom or freedom of speech, which was for Reporters Without Borders, PEN, Amnesty, the Journalist Union, a way of like, okay, this doesn't really concern us. When the case took longer and longer time, and of course people like Stefania, Johannes and Percy and Arne and Sigyn continue, because this is the role of the civil society also you, of all of you in here, keep demanding and asking. These organizations also realize that there's something fundamental wrong here, and this person, Julian Assange, in this case, should be liberated because it's a great violation against his freedom and his rights as a citizen and also as a whistleblower or publisher. So for Reporters Without Borders in London, I would like to say, and this is a frequent question that we get in Sweden, why do you never speak about Julian Assange? And I constantly repeat over and over again, please go into rsf.org and click on the United Kingdom, on UK, and you'll find a lot of information, because Rebecca Vincent, who works at the office there, has put down her life in this case. She has worked so much to help Julian Assange. I would like to say RSF is the only organization that's been on all the hearings in London High Court. So I would like to underscore this. We really take this case serious, but I agree that we've been very slow in the start, and I just looked Amnesty International, PEN International, all demand the same question, or demand the same thing, that Julian Assange should be released and the case dropped. But just to add another thing here, with lots of talk about press freedom in here, and also adding on Percy that we shouldn't feed the right-wing populism by drawing all journalists into a conspiracy theory in Sweden. That's quite dangerous. I'm very proud of my journalist colleagues in Sweden, and I refuse to come into a debate or listen to accusations that journalists in Sweden are sort of part of conspiracy theory avoiding this case. This has to do with simple editorial choices at the desk every day. And fortunately, Julian Assange is not the top of the agenda. But as we hear here, it should be. And you should continue. And that's what I said earlier. We should continue to demand this to be top of the agenda. And you had lots of journalists here today, and SVT is still here talking or filming. So I think I would like to underscore this. It's taking a long time, just as with the Espionage Act. Too late. In a few weeks, there will be a new law about permission to transmit live TV in Sweden, which will mean that it will be quite easy to, for example, take the license of TV4 away. Very easy. It's a new law, and we haven't heard a lot about it. Swedish journalists are really bad at following the parliament in Sweden, what's happening in the parliament and proposals for laws. And that is what journalists should be doing more in Sweden, I think. And that's a hard lesson we learned in November last year with the Espionage Act. This was a long speech, but I thought I had to spill it out because we're part of this seminar, and it's very important to me. In Italy, it's dangerous to be a journalist. It's not dangerous to be a journalist in Sweden. I would just like to say that. Thank you.
Just use your word.
Maybe you want to answer about the dangerous. Apologize. Well, I don't know what to add in regard to the. Sorry, can you hear me? Yes, I don't know exactly what to add in regard to the NGOs. Some of them, as we have encountered in different other cases, are also very politicized. I think the question was about Amnesty International. From my memory, I think it took something like 15 years or maybe longer before Amnesty considered Mordechai Vanunu a prisoner of conscience. And I mean, this is...
Who is that?
Mordechai Vanunu was the man that was the whistleblower regarding the Israeli nuclear program. So there is, of course, a similar problem, I'm assuming, although I have no first-hand knowledge about this, with the NGO community as within the journalistic one as well. And given, of course, that we shouldn't go into conspiracy theories as to all journalists being part of a sinister cabal of conspiracies, it is also essential that we are honest about the limitations of our profession. This is not only essential, it is paramount for us to be able to understand how we are able to work and under what circumstances. So certain things in certain societies are legally impossible to do for a variety of reasons. Perhaps in Italy, maybe Stefania will speak about that, there is also an element of violence. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe you will be able to speak about that. In Sweden, there is there's a different element to it, which is of course related to the fact that journalists will lose their jobs if they ask uncomfortable questions or make the wrong types of reports. But what I can testify to is that there are very, very specific and very relevant investigations that I have personally conducted in the highest parts of Swedish media that have been spiked for a variety of reasons. I can give you many examples. I can give you another example if you want, which is related to the Swedish participation in the war in Afghanistan, which is a story that was spiked at Dagens Nyheter, together with the current head of Pressombudsmannen, who at that time was the head of news section of Dagens Nyheter, and I worked with him. And this was a story about how the Swedish authorities had bribed local Afghani warlords so that they would not kick out Sweden from the war effort, which was an absolutely astonishing story. This was spiked, and also it was spiked contrary to the desire of the head of the news section. Right? So I think that before we start concerning ourselves about the implications of speaking about limitations of freedom of speech, I think that we need to apply a higher degree of sincerity to journalists in general, to start talking about these particular things that we know as a fact that we personally have been stopped from reporting on. I have a few good friends, both in Swedish television and some other publications, where we're talking about would be fun perhaps to make a book, which is sort of equivalent to a similar thing that has been done in the United States a number of years ago. The unpublished investigations of Sweden. And I mean, we all have these unpublished stories. I'll give you a simple example, just so that you understand what I'm speaking about. This is not a revelation to anybody, if you understand. In the beginning of our evening, the lady that presented the whole evening made a quote from George Orwell. Now, I don't know to what extent you are aware of a book called Animal Farm. So Animal Farm is one of those books that, at least when I went to school, was considered student literature. And everybody read it, and there was one interpretation of the book, which was, look at the Soviet Union, they're dickheads. Yes? They tried to have some kind of egalitarian system, it didn't work out. So this book is one of the most published books in world history. It is obligatory curriculum literature in a very large part of at least the Western world. I'm going to read you a small part, which is not from this book, but it is from the foreword of this book that was actually not published. And this is an introduction to Animal Farm. It was found in the 1990s in a lost archive because it was simply cut out from the book. It's very long. I will not read the whole part. So I will only read the little part which I think is relevant to our topic. And it is after explaining for a couple of pages the reasoning for why Mr. Orwell dislikes the Soviet Union and so forth. He explains the following. For all I know, by the time that this book is published, my view of the Soviet regime may be generally accepted one. But what use would that be in itself? To exchange one orthodoxy for another is not necessarily an advance. The enemy is the gramophone mind, whether or not one agrees with the record that is being played at the moment. The general idea that Mr. Orwell explains in his foreword that was cut out of the book forever is actually that it is a critique of us. It is a critique of the way that we perceive the world and how we censor ourselves. But we have never read it, because it's not in the book.
Okay, we go 10 minutes past 9. We have to finish at 9, really, but 10 minutes more. Sure, Arne.
Yes, I think what Orwell is telling us, in a way, is that we have to try to stay aware and get our perspectives confronted. And I want to return to what I said about a moral action being a personal kind of action. I was not aware of the Assange case until about 2020. I became aware by means of a Norwegian friend who told me I should read an interview with someone named Nils Meltzer, which had been published in Switzerland. I did that, and that was the first awakening call. And then there were two ladies and one gentleman who are all present here, Sigyn Meder, Kristina Hillgren, and Anders Rommelsjö, who told me things which I hadn't thought of myself. It was a personal dimension to it. And I realized that I had, since I've been married to two feminists in my life, I've had to be careful about gender issues. But I realized that this was not a gender issue, that I had to some way step out of that prejudgment and treat it for what it was. A criminal act against an individual, continuing without anyone doing anything about it, and in my own country, a total lack of awareness. So I think we should, each of us, talk to other people, starting the discussion on the personal level, taking a risk that they will be angry at us, but still try to convince. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I completely agree with Arne, and sure the pronunciation is correct. And we have very few months before this case will. I don't know. I feel the urgency. It's a matter of few months. So if he leaves Europe, he's gone. He has no chance whatsoever to win the case in the US. So the moment he leaves London, Julian is gone. So I feel the urgency. And I can also reply about amnesty. In these days, they are active. In these days, there is no basically press freedom or human rights organization which is not supporting Julian Assange. All of them oppose extradition. All of them ask for his release. But they have been under pressure for the Swedish allegations for almost a decade. I know for sure, because some of them approached me, asked me about what my FOI case had allowed to reveal. And don't forget, even a very sophisticated person like Nils Meltzer initially was tempted not to investigate the case. He writes that he was convinced he was a hacker, he was a rapist, he was a narcissist, and if a sophisticated human rights investigator had been influenced by this demonization campaign, you can imagine the ordinary people who have not the tools he has, how they have been influenced by this case. So this demonization campaign has worked for over a decade. Now we have very, very little time to address it. So try to campaign, try to talk to other people, to your contact, to your parliamentary representatives. Try to do whatever you can. Maybe you won't succeed, but this case is not just about him. It is about your right to know what your government is doing with your money and in your name. So it's not just about us as journalists. It's mainly about you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have a very fine evening, learning so much thing, and that we know how to continue this work for the truth, and I call it the revolutionary work really, in these times of deceit, as Orwell said. I will tell you, when I thank you, the public, and especially Stefania and all the speakers. Thank you very much. I want to tell you who are the organizers. They are the Support Committee for Julian Assange, Reporters Without Borders, Teater Tribunalen, Teater Tribunalen, and Folket i Bild, Kulturfront, and IrakSolidaritet. So it's this organization. And I want, before finishing, just to say, we will see to it that Julian gets free and the war criminals prosecuted. Yeah.